Good morning. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Water Commission. Roll call looks like all commissioners are present. Councilmember Sten is not here yet, but we hope to have her here shortly. Any changes to the agenda?
Chair Bernie, the one thing I was going to mention on 6A, we did change the title of that. Instead of evaluation of options, it's city participation in state water projects, suspended table A and Delta conveyance projects. So it's just a clarification. We thought it made the subject more clear.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any comments from the public on items not on the agenda? No? Okay. Let's start with the consent calendar. We've got two meeting minutes to approve, both the August 15th and the July 18th.
Move to approve. Second.
I need to abstain from the August because I wasn't here for that one.
And I'm going to abstain from July because I wasn't here for that one.
Split them up into two. I'll move to approve the July meeting minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and I'll abstain on that one. And then do we have a motion for the August?
That will be my motion for August.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
And then I'll abstain from that one.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just want to comment on the August one. Under the review of Water Commission's role and responsibility, I want to thank staff for being so inclusive and capturing what we talked about there in good detail. So good job on that.
Great. Thank you. Let's start with 6A, the city participation in state water projects, suspended table A and Delta conveyance. This was a big one.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Bernie and commissioners. I'm Kathy Taylor. I'm now here as the acting water supply manager. And I'm here with our water supply analyst, Dakota Corey, and the two of us are going to present this presentation on the state water projects, suspended table A and Delta water conveyance project. As you mentioned, it is a complicated one, so thank you for your attention. The recommendation in front of you is to receive a presentation and to provide direction on whether to participate in pursuing the reacquisition of suspended table A water and whether to participate in the Delta conveyance project. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ms. Corey.
Good morning, Chair Bernie and commissioners. My name is Dakota Corey, and I'm the water supply analyst for the city. I'll give you a brief overview of my presentation. We'll talk quickly about the state water project and how the city currently participates in it. Then we'll look at state water project reliability. And finally, we'll look at the suspended table A program and the costs and benefits potentially available to the city by participating in that program. So this is a map of the state water project, and you'll see that it takes water that falls in our relatively precipitation high Northern California and brings it down south to population high but precipitation low Southern California. And so the water flows from the Sierras where we get snowpack down the Sacramento and Feather Rivers into the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And then you can see the delta is circled by the black hash marks near the San Francisco Bay there. And then from the Delta, it's pumped in a series of canals and pipelines down to Southern California, and that's represented by the dark blue lines. I'd also like to bring your attention to the coastal branch of the State Water Project, which you can see about 2/3 of the way down the state. That's the portion of the State Water Project that supplies water to Santa Barbara County. So then zooming in on that coastal branch, and I apologize that this isn't the best presentation map in terms of font size, but you can see up in the upper right-hand corner of the map that the coastal branch connects to the California Aqueduct up near Kern County, and then water is pumped over Colonial Pass and down all the way to Lake Cachuma, where then it can be distributed to South Coast water agencies via the Tecolote Tunnel and the South Coast Conduit. And the coastal branch of the State Water Project was constructed in partnership between the Department of Water Resources, or DWR, and the Central Coast Water Authority, or CCWA. And the CCWA is a joint powers authority that was formed in the 90s to construct, manage, and operate the Santa Barbara County's local facilities for the distribution of state water. So what is Table A water? Table A water is the water entitlement or right to state water project water. And what's important to understand about Table A water is that it represents the maximum right that we have to state water project water. So for the city, we have a Table A amount currently of 3,300 acre feet per year. What's also important to understand about Table A water is we rarely actually get that much water in any given year because the state water project has limited reliability. And so in any given year, that reliability can range from 20 to 60%, and on average has been coming in at about 50% over the past several years. So we have a maximum Table A amount, which is the maximum amount we have available to us, but then in any given year, we might actually get quite a bit less than that, depending on how much is available in the system. And the availability is based upon water that's available in the state water project system, which is usually dependent on weather, snowpack, rainfall, etc. So a little bit of background on the county's participation in the state water project. In 1963, when it was conceived that the county would like to participate in the state water project, they contracted with the Department of Water Resources for a volume of up to 57,700 acre feet of water per year off the state water project. In 1991, when they decided to build the coastal branch and move forward with the acquisition of that water, they contracted for a total amount of 45,486 acre feet per year. So what happened is there was a remaining 12,214 acre feet that was suspended, left on the table with the option to reacquire that water in the future. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the suspended Table A program, is do we want to participate in reacquiring a portion of that approximately 12,000 acre feet per year of suspended Table A water? That's the question we're kind of exploring today.
What the driver is here is there are other state water contractors, there are 29 in total, who are interested in acquiring that if the Santa Barbara County is not.
That is true. Thanks, Josh.
Transport capacity of the pipeline, I read it, but what's the transport capacity of the pipeline? Is that clear?
I'm getting there. So that'll be 2 slides from now. First, let's look at the historic reliability of the state water project. I mentioned in my previous slide that reliability varies from year to year and is almost never 100%. And so if we look at this graphic, we have a time period of 2000 to 2019. And the total average reliability, so in any given year, we typically receive about 60% of our total Table A amount, and that's represented by the red bar. And then I want to bring your attention to a more recent history, which begins in 2008, so from 2008 to 2019. And you'll see that reliability dropped to around 50%, and that's represented by the green line. The reason for that drop is that in 2008, a biological opinion was released on the pumps that pump the water out of the delta, and it was determined that the pumps were harmful to the fish that live in the delta. And so the ability to pump from the delta was greatly reduced. There's time limits, basically, months that the water can't be pumped at all. And so that reduced the overall reliability on the project. And then I want to look at one more time period. So if we look at the years from 2012 to 2017, which ended up being a relatively wet year for us, that was our most recent drought. And you can see that reliability on the state water project was even less than our more recent average of 50%. In fact, in 2014, we only got an allocation of 5% of our Table A amount. And then these are some numbers from the Department of Water Resources on projected reliability of the state water project. And you can see that they call the current condition reliability about 60%, and that corresponds with the red side bar that we saw on the previous slide going back to 2000. And then they say in the future, if the Delta Conveyance Project is not constructed, that reliability will drop down to 48%, which is what we were seeing with that green bar from 2008 on. And Kathy's going to talk about the Delta Conveyance Project in a little bit. They say if the project is built, the Delta Conveyance Project is built, then that reliability will go back up to around 67%. And it's important to note that for planning purposes here at the city, when we developed our long-term water supply plan, we assumed a 50% reliability of state water project water, which seems to be pretty consistent with our recent history. Okay, so The question before us now is whether or not we'd like to participate in acquiring some of the suspended Table A water. All members of the CCWA have been requested to indicate their level of interest in participating in the program. Expressing interest at this point would commit the city to some financial obligations related to administration and legal work to develop those contracts. It doesn't, however, commit the city to an actual amount of water at this time. That would be determined in the future as we work through the process. Note that it will require a county board of supervisor approval because the county is currently the contract holder with the State Water Project water rights. Okay, so one of the things that we need to understand in order to determine whether or not participating in the suspended Table A program makes sense for the city is to understand the capacity of the Coastal Branch Pipeline. When it was constructed, the capacity was designed for the exact Table A amount that the county contracted for, which was that 45,486 acre-feet per year. So that means there's no additional capacity for that additional approximately 12,000 acre-feet per year. However, as we discussed earlier, we know that the reliability on the State Water Project system is almost always less than 100%. And so what that means is of that 45,000 acre-feet per year, we're usually getting an average reliability of about half of that. So there's lots of capacity still left in the system. So if we were to, and let me give an example now with the city's allocation. We have a Table A allocation with the state water project for 3,300 acre-feet per year. Our capacity allocated to us on the coastal branch is 3,000 acre-feet per year. And so we consider that additional 300 acre-feet a drought buffer. And so what that means, again, is when the allocation is less than 100%, we're going to get more water because the allocation is applied to the full 3,300 acre-feet per year. And there's still enough capacity in the system for us to take that because everybody in the system is getting less than 100% allocation.
So Commissioner Keller, you're kind of answering your question too, is the pipeline was sized as it goes down to Kachuma, it gets smaller in diameter. And so it starts off with a capacity to move 45,000 acre-feet a year. When it gets to Kachuma, it's about 15,000.
Can I, just since you're on that point, does San Luis Obispo take any water out of there?
Yes. I think their total, San Luis Obispo County is like somewhere around 5,000 acre-feet a year, and there's broken up a bunch of small communities that pull out of that.
So my last point in this discussion of capacity is that if we were to acquire some of the suspended Table A water, that additional increment of water would act like our drought buffer, like the 300 acre-feet per year that we have currently. So in times of drought, when the allocation on the State Water Project is less than 100%, we would get more water because we would be applying that percentage of allocation to a bigger number, and then there would be capacity in the system to bring it down because everybody would be getting less than 100% allocation. Another thing to consider when we're looking at the suspended Table A program is the role of state water in the city's water supply portfolio. So as you know, we have a very diverse water supply portfolio, and unlike some agencies that rely really heavily on the state water project, such as the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, we really use state water as a drought supply. And so what that means is in wet years, when we have surface water available from Lake Kachuma or Gibraltar Reservoir, we typically don't take much of our state water because it's more costly. There's money to pump it down to us, and there's money to associated with treating it. And so it's less expensive for us to use our local surface water supplies. However, in times of drought, it becomes a very important supply. Our surface waters are diminished. We don't have as much available to us. And then we can take state water. Another really important attribute to being a state water contractor through CCWA is that we basically have the plumbing. We're attached to the State Water Project, which means that if we'd like to purchase water from another contractor on the project, we have the ability to move that water through the state and get it to our communities. And it's been a very successful source of water for us during the recent drought.
What you'll hear from us, and we'll probably say this a few times, is that although staff is not supportive of the suspended Table A, we believe the State Water Project has really come through for us and really helped us, and we believe that connection is really important here. We've talked a lot about this. Going forward, going into this last drought, we had been exploring and working with several water banking opportunities that did pan out, some of them better than others. But certainly, I think it is the heightened awareness following this drought is to continue to explore those opportunities to take the state water allocations as they come in and we don't have a need for it that year, to use that opportunity to bank it in other parts of California so that we can have it and deliver it when we need it. So to that end, again, very supportive of the State Water Project, even though we may not be in support of this additional water.
So let's take a little bit of a look at how state water has worked for the city in the past. And again, this is a graphic going back to 2000. And you can see in the time period from 2000 to 2013, or pre-drought, that we didn't always take all of the Table A water we had available to us. The Table A water that we did take is represented by the blue bars. And then the red bars represent water that we did have available to us, but we didn't need, so we didn't take it. And this kind of plays to Mr. Hagmark's point that if we had banking opportunities, that would have been a great way to take that water and store it. But because those are limited at this time, we just left that on the table and didn't use it. So then from 2014 to 2018 on, this is our most recent drought. And you can see that we did use all of the Table A water we had available to us. You can see that it was fairly limited, especially in 2014. That was when we had a 5% allocation. So our Table A water was fairly limited. And then in addition to that, we purchased additional water that we could move through the state water system from other contractors. And that's represented by the green bars. Those are our supplemental water purchases. So we can run through a quick example here of what would it look like if the city participated in the suspended Table A program at an amount of 500 acre-feet of water per year. So because we know that the long-term average of reliability of the State Water Project system is about 48%, that looks like we would get an additional 240 acre-feet per year of additional water by participating in the program. In the drought period, the 5-year drought period from 2014 to 2018, that means we would have gotten an additional 1,000 acre-feet of Table A water. So if we plug that back into our historical deliveries from the State Water Project, you'll see in the years, again, from 2000 to 2013, the pink bars represent the fact that we would have more Table A water available to us. But again, we didn't need it for many of those years, so we would have left it on the table or not had it delivered. From 2014 to 2018, when we were in the drought, you can see the light blue bars, which show that the Table A water would have been valuable. We would have used it, and we would have about a total of 1,000 acre-feet of additional water. And that would have reduced the amount of supplemental water we would have to purchase, which is represented again by the green bars.
I'd like to point out kind of an outlier there in 2016. I believe the delivery there was we were able to use others' capacity, and I don't remember what agency did not take delivery, but that allowed us to deliver more water that year. So that's why that one kind of stands out. Typically, as we'd mentioned before, our capacity is around 3,300 acre-feet a year.
Okay, so then what would it cost the city to participate at a level of 500 acre-feet per year of suspended Table A water? We would have those upfront acquisition costs, which I mentioned earlier, that would include contracting for the water through CCWA and DWR, and that would be an annual cost of about $93,500. There would be fixed costs associated with increasing our Table A amount, and those fixed costs apply every year, regardless of whether or not we deliver the water. And so the annual cost associated with that would be $68,500. We would also have variable costs. The variable costs apply when we have the water delivered. So this is for like treatment and pumping the water through the system. And that would total $106,000 per year. So we come to a total annual cost of $268,000 per year. And then on a per unit cost, that breaks down to $1,117 per acre foot. And again, we're assuming that we would get, on average, about 240 acre feet per year from that additional 500 acre feet of suspended Table A water. So here's just one more example using recent historical data with the drought. We showed in 2014 to 2018 that we purchased a total of 12,200 acre feet of additional water, and that was a cost of $14.7 million.
That included both purchase and delivery of that water.
That's my understanding, yeah. And so then, as an example, if we would have participated in the suspended Table A program starting back in 2000, we would have had that additional 1,000 acre feet of suspended Table A water available to us, so our supplemental purchases would be reduced by that amount. So we'd only have to purchase 11,200 acre feet of supplemental water. But again, because we had those fixed costs associated with the higher Table A amount, the total cost would actually be higher at $17 million versus the $14.7 million we saw on the previous slide.
So I've asked about this before, but your costs for purchased water never show the cost for repayment, do they? Because most all of those purchases require some repayment.
We did include the cost of transportation in returning that water, assuming we were going to use Table A water. As we did this
Okay,
year, we
so
took our
make the
Table A.
assumption that we're going to use whatever water we're going to use. You build that into the cost when it has to go back in 10 years. Or
Right.
whatever.
We did build.
Okay.
We did build the transportation cost to
Okay,
send that water
thanks.
back.
All right. So in summary, our connection to the State Water Project and having state water as part of our portfolio for the city is extremely beneficial. As we mentioned earlier, it provided 1/3 of our total supplies during the most recent drought. So it's extremely valuable to us, especially during times of drought. In terms of the suspended Table A program, it would provide a small increment of additional water supply to us, especially again during drought times. However, there is quite a bit higher cost because, like I mentioned earlier, there's those fixed costs that apply each year. And then also the State Water Project, as we discussed, has a limited reliability compared to some of the other sources we have available to us to supply our community. So, for example, in a drought, DCEL has a really high reliability for us because we own and operate that project, where State Water Project, we're dependent upon the reliability on the entire project. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Kathy, who's going to talk about the Delta Conveyance Project.
Just a question. Thank you for the presentation. Very nice. The cost of diesel per acre foot, roughly?
So we have two costs to it. We'd like to talk about the operating costs. The operating costs that we have in our current contract is about $1,400 an acre foot, and then there's about $1,000 an acre foot of capital costs associated with debt service for the next 20 years.
I have a slide that addresses that.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question also.
Yeah, I think there's a few questions, if that's
go
okay,
ahead.
before we move on. Go ahead.
Okay, on page 4, third paragraph, it talks about the administrative and legal expenses are estimated to be $621,000 to be shared proportionally by CCWA members. Is that only those that opt in, or is that everybody anyway?
Yes, it's just the agencies that opt in.
Okay. And again, I'll just make this comment at this point. It seemed to me that staff actually made a recommendation within here, but when you look on the front page in a recommendation of council, you don't really have a recommendation on either item. It's essentially council received the report. But I thought, again, it's more editorial comment. I thought you guys did a really good job of making the case. So we'll talk about that when we get the recommendation.
Commissioner Jordan, did you?
So somewhere in there you make also a comment on part of the costs involved with that are costs for like Oroville Dam and other things like that too. So the whatever the number is, the 12,000 unallocated that are out there right now, is the state picking up those costs rather than being allocated down to users?
So what happened is when we suspended that 12,000 acre feet and said we didn't want to take it right now, the county paid on some of those costs for a while and just took up the bill. And so part of that reacquisition cost that we talked about would be paying our share of the money that the county paid back to them. And then also, then at a point in time, they suspended making those payments. And so we have to become whole again with the Department of Water Resources. So part of that will be paying them back for those costs that we've suspended.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions before we move on to the Delta? Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Taylor?
Oh, I do have one, just, and it's related to the memo from CCWA, and it's, again, a comment. In the second page of their letter, they have this little table that looks at the current Table A compared with suspended Table A, and in the long-term acre feet per year. And they try to basically say that the current Table A is 62%, 28,000 acre feet. Suspended Table A, they would add the 12,000 acre feet, and they come down at 48% to the 27,000. They say there's only 500 acre feet difference. Actually, you needed to use, in my calculation, 48% long term on both of them. And when you did that, essentially, it's a much bigger delta. That's their mistake, not ours, in that regard.
Yeah, I think we took a more conservative approach just based on the last few years.
Yeah, well, but again, they even talk about the fact that without the long-term reliability is going to drop down to 40-some%, and they kept using the 60%. Anyway, it's apples and oranges in their calculations.
Just a quick point to Commissioner Davis. Page 2, they do bury the recommendation, but it's there. Staff recommendation for the city not
No,
participate.
actually, that's what I was saying. That's why I said they made a
It
good
is
staff
buried. It's a
recommendation.
good point.
They just didn't put it in the recommendation to council, which when we get to our recommendations, we can talk about that. Yeah, no, I did see that. Thank you.
All right, the Delta Conveyance Project. As you know, the state water goes through the Delta, and there are threats to this water that's conveyed. First off, there's a threat to the species because of the water pumping and flow through the Delta, specifically the Delta smelt salmon and longfin smelt. The water conveyance reliability, as Ms. Corey said, is currently at 48%, and seismic events that could result in levee breaches, and also sea level rise that could cause seawater to flow into the Delta. And additionally, there's downward pressures on regulations that have been happening over the years. Every few years, there's additional regulations that reduce the export capability of water through the Delta. In 1980s, it was about 8 million acre feet per year, and it has gradually decreased, which reduces our flexibility. And right now, we're operating just under 5 million acre feet per year, approximately. And in the future, who knows? The proposed Delta Conveyance Project, originally we had the California Water Action Plan, is more commonly known as the Twin Tunnels Project, formerly known as the Cal Water Fix, and Governor Brown signed it in 2014 into law. It was undersubscribed and ultimately deemed too expensive. We now have a revised Delta Conveyance Project. Governor Newsom signed it in 2019, and it simplifies the overall project, and it's a single tunnel, but we really don't know the specifics or the cost. So this is just a map of the Delta area. The dotted line shows where the pipeline would be, and it actually goes underneath the Delta, so it would protect the pipeline from all the threats that I mentioned. I guess what I want to mention also that the water, the 3 dots, that's where the Sacramento River, the intake pipes would be on the Sacramento River. It would intake there, it would flow underneath the Delta, and it would flow to the state water pipes. And again, to re-mention the threats, it would protect the fish. There would be no impacts on the fish. And if the levees were to break, this would not affect the pipeline. And if there was any kind of inundation from the seawater, again, the pipeline would be protected. So again, as I said, we do not know what the single tunnel project really looks like or what the costs are, but for the sake of a discussion, there was an option from the Cal Water Fix that looked at a single tunnel option to flow 6,000 cubic feet per second of water through the Delta. And from that example, the key financing assumptions are that it would be a 40-year bond term at 6% interest. The construction costs were anticipated to be $11 billion over 10 years, assuming a 3% interest rate. The total construction cost would be $14 billion. So the estimated average cost per year with operation and maintenance would be another $1 billion. And then CCWA, their share of the project is 1.09%, the proportion of Table A water. That would be cost them $10.9 million annually. What does that mean for the city? Well, the city's estimated costs, our portion of the CCWA's 1.09% is 7.25%. So essentially, out of that 45,486 acre feet per year, as Ms. Corey explained, we get 3,300 acre feet per year. So our estimated annual cost would be approximately $790,000. Again, this is just based on the Cal Water Fix's estimate. So estimated.
What's a number like that then translate into a monthly bill spread across the city? I mean, if you just said, 40,000 users? I mean, would that just be an easy way to make a ballpark?
If you wanted to ballpark it, you would divide the 790,000 by 27,000 service
7,000,
connections.
okay.
Because it'd basically be kind of a fixed charge that we would be paying every year.
Continuing with this example of the estimated unit cost of water, I'm getting to Commissioner Keller's question, I think. As Ms. Corey said, we go from a reliability from 48% to 67% with the Delta Conveyance Project. So the 627 acre feet additional supply yield to the city we would have. And so for the unit cost for fixed expenses would be $1,289 per acre foot. And the unit cost for variable expenses would be $440 per acre foot. And this all adds up to a total unit cost of $1,729 per acre foot. So as for unit cost comparison, the suspended Table A, as Ms. Corey said, was I think a little over $1,100 per acre foot. And the Delta Conveyance would be about, as I just said, I think $1,729 per acre foot. And it's kind of interesting that the suspended Table A, the third option there, the suspended Table A plus the Delta Conveyance Project would actually be a little lower, but this is because we'd be getting much more water, so in the end it would be more expensive. And then the fourth bar is the supplemental water purchases, and this is based on our recent experience with our current drought. And we also put up here the expanded desal to show the cost comparison with that, and is on par with the Delta Conveyance Project. And I should have explained that the blue bars are the fixed unit costs as compared to and the green bar is the variable unit costs. And I also want to add that the 4 bars are all water that is in Northern California and would have to come to us from the other side of the mountain, whereas the expanded desal is a local source here where we could have more control over.
And what's also not quantified here is as we expand the facility, the operating costs go down. I think I had shared with you at one point if the facility, for example, were to be expanded to 7,500 acre feet a year, our unit cost goes from $1,400 an acre foot down to $900 an acre foot. So again, it's hard to capture that in all this, but expanded desal does have some economies of scale that.
What's the payback period comparison, like expanded desal versus the Delta Conveyance? That's 40 years for the Delta Conveyance, right?
Right, and the desal would be 20 years.
20, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How reliable is the supplemental water purchases? Like if there's extended drought across the state, can we rely on being able to make those purchases in the future?
So we had talked about that initially. It's around 48% is what we saw over the last drought period. Sorry.
She was asking about the water that we purchased, not suspended Table A, the supplemental. Like, how likely are we going to be able to buy supplemental water going forward?
That's a great question. We thought it was very successful over the last drought period, and right now they're redoing the contracts, and one of the big items that's on the table is whether or not to keep this return component of water. But I think the program was working how it was intended, so we expect there to continue to be opportunities to purchase water.
Thank you.
Are there permitting issues for expanding diesel? I mean, significant permitting issues.
No, we believe we've our current permits will take us up to at least 7,500 without a problem, and 10,000 is where we feel like we also have authority.
However, there's also additional planning costs for the Delta Conveyance project, where the group who is in charge of this, the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, is requesting an additional $350 million to continue the design of the project. What that means to CCWA is $3.8 million would be their costs, and we would pay our proportional share, which would be approximately $275,000. And again, I just want to reiterate that this is just an example that we took from the Cal Water fix. This is not, we do not know what the proposed project really looks like or the costs. So the net timeline and the next steps for this, Department of Water Resources is requesting participation decisions from the 29 state water project contractors. And CCWA project participants and members are currently considering their options. And CCWA board decision will be made at the October 24th board meeting. And after that, CCWA will send their decision to the Department of Water Resources, along with the Santa Barbara County, who is our contract holder. And possible CCWA participation and actions. The first is to opt in to the project completely and attempt to enter into a side agreement with another state water project contractor for a portion that is not needed or wanted. Or they can opt out of the project completely and enter into a participation agreement with another state water project contract for a smaller share of the project at a later date. And there has been discussion with San Luis County. So at this point, I'm bringing the recommendation back to you to receive a presentation. I thank you for your attention, and to provide direction on whether to participate in, number one, is pursuing the acquisition of the suspended Table A water, and whether to participate in the Delta Conveyance project.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Questions?
So I have a similar question on as on the other one. So right now the conveyance system is reliant upon these levees to get through the Delta. Are the member agencies paying an allocation for somebody to maintain those levees for that delivery system?
Right now, and I think that great question, and it comes up because you might have heard like people talk about islands. These are inverted islands, so they are areas that would have or should have been basically submerged underwater. There was if we were to go back to that picture of the Delta, much more of that land would be underwater. However, over the years, value of farming, people picked up this land, built these levees, and then dewatered it. And so have now created this channels, but these are maintained by the farmers who farm there.
Okay.
And so these little levee system is not, I don't believe, is an organized maintenance project, and it certainly isn't maintained by the State Water Project.
Yeah. So there's no gain that we start paying for operations on a tunnel, and we get some money back on contributions to levee maintenance.
Right.
That's not happening.
Right.
And then I don't remember the numbers or the stats, but aren't both ends of the Delta where the tunnel would be basically below seawater level, or one end is, and the other one's like at 3 feet above sea level, where this tunnel would be replacing the Delta systems? The ingress and the egress part of the system. Isn't that one of the concerns, that one of those ends right now is below sea level, one of them is very close, and if you talk sea level rise, the reality is that sea level rise just leaving what's there right now, that sea level rise eventually is, you're going to be well below sea level at both ends of this water conveyance system as it exists now. Is that not true?
My understanding of the proposed design for the single tunnel is that the start of that tunnel is actually going to take water directly out of the Sacramento River, so that avoids the sea level. If water were to intrude into the Delta, it kind of avoids that problem because you're taking it directly from the freshwater source.
Okay.
At the other end, where the pumps are, those pumps are located in the Delta, so if you had seawater intrusion, that could be a problem. They are further back from, the San Francisco Bay, so I don't know if you can speak more to that, Joshua, but
Yeah, I believe that the model, and there's some videos. We've actually talked about trying to get some of the videos that DWR has put together. But the pumping station is obviously moving water up to a canal, which is then gravity flowing. And so I think hardening those facilities would be much easier in the sense of sea level rise, because there is probably going to be some adaptations that need to be taken into consideration. But
that's one of the considerations, isn't it? It's not just that a levee may fail. It's also that any rise in sea level also continues to worsen the situation in the delta just because the pressure of the water coming that direction, right?
Right. There's some graphic to kind of show it. I could do some more research on it and provide.
I can look back in my notes. I think it's from the Aqua conference. I saw some numbers. So they were really sobering, I just thought.
Yeah.
I mean, basically the entire conveyance system going through the delta, from what I saw, just to be general, was below sea level. Everything was below sea level, being protected by these deltas, or these levees, but it's already below sea level. And one of the goals of the two-tunnel project at that time was to basically put two straws there that didn't matter where sea level was or became or what it did. You would just have these systems that could convey regardless. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think what's helpful too. I don't know, you not to get political here, but you often hear about there's too much water going out through San Francisco Bay. And I think part of the challenge in there and the misinformation is if that water isn't going out, seawater is coming in. And so to the extent that fresh water, yes, is going out, it is basically keeping this area of the delta remaining basically fresh water. And so you may recall in 2014, one of the projects that DWR embarked on was they actually narrowed the delta somewhere in the Antioch area. They narrowed it because the flows coming in were so low, they were worried about seawater making its way into the delta and ruining on the delta ecosystem. And so they actually narrowed it so that we had the velocities going out to keep the seawater back. Of course, as soon as conditions improved, it was temporary. They had to remove that. But that's the kind of infrastructure that they would have to do ultimately if flows continue to diminish or sea level rise continues to come up, is how to keep it out of the delta ecosystem.
And I just want to add, we put up one of our backup slides for the sea level rise adaptation, and it shows where the years there, the 2015, 25, 60, and 21. That's the sea level rise anticipation of where the ocean's water would come in, and as you can see, where the pipeline is. And one concern, valid or not, is that if seawater was to inundate the delta, that there would be pressure from that area to divert water from the pipeline to the delta to actually flush the seawater back out. And so that would interrupt the supplies from this project to Southern California because of that, whether it's valid or not. But I think it's a plausible concern.
Are there questions or comments?
Yes, one question. So if we decide to not participate in this project for the moment, what's the opportunity? What's the possibility that they would reopen participation in the future? What's the experience with that?
So the concept that is, and this is again lacking the information, is that we know Metropolitan is going to participate. They're the big players. I mean, without them, there's really nothing there. So the large players are going to participate, and the thought is that down the road, we could participate through them. I'm sure there would be some type of significant cost to do that, but maybe at the time there's more of a firm reliability reason to do it. And I think that's, I keep going back to why we've invested so much here and why the city of Santa Barbara has one of the most diverse water supply portfolios in California. We recognize all the challenges that come with our different supplies, and we are not fully dependent on the State Water Project. And I think it gives us an opportunity to have kind of a different take than Metropolitan or Callegas, who, they get 80% of their water from state water.
On the recommendations under where it gets a Water Commission recommendation, I've asked Joshua if he could break that out, as we've talked about before. But it basically says that Water Commission voted blah, blah, blah in support of staff's recommendations. On the first item, in the executive summary, yeah, you recommend not basically signing up for the supplemental Table A. But on the conveyance, there's not really a staff recommendation. So what is it that where is staff on this item?
Our recommendation is not to participate. That is also the belief of the executive director for CCWA. He still believes there's just not enough information available, and kind of take the wait and see approach on this. So it is staff's
I know it's
position on that.
late in the game in terms of your staff report. Could you say that at the end of this section, just so that council gets that, so that if we do take an action to support staff recommendations, there are two there that we're supporting?
Yep.
Just in framing this discussion, this presentation was given to council. So when you're considering this, know that council's had it, but took no action and awaiting recommendations
Yeah, no,
also from
I
our
actually
commission.
saw that.
Okay.
I was just in the report itself. He has it framed that we're supporting staff recommendations.
Yeah.
But there really wasn't one on Part B.
Understood.
But there is a position. That was really what I wanted to get clarified. So thank you for that.
Any other questions, comments?
One more. So I don't know. Maybe I just didn't hear this, but so I get what you're saying on your recommendation, but and how that relates to state water. But when we purchase water, how much of our water comes from either above that point or from a source that has to get that water from above that point?
Correct. So when we purchased water this last year, we were purchasing it from Antelope Valley, East Kern, so Lancaster area. There's a CCWA out there, so they are
Downhill.
They are likely. I can't say right now. Everyone's putting in. I'd get that they would participate in the tunnel project. So
No, but their source was Delta Water Conveyance.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then Mojave, again, another player that I think will participate in the pipeline. So again, I still feel confident that we'd be buying from current customers or our current clients that already would likely participate in the additional reliability.
Unless the whole thing just tanks and it's not a conveyance anymore.
Right.
Right? Okay.
And if I remember correctly, there was quite a few years we could only buy from people that were south of the Delta.
Yes, that's a great point, Chair Bernie. There was a few years in there where we bought water from rice farmers north of the Delta, and then there was the tax of leaving water in the Delta when we conveyed water through there. So those options have a small window for working, and I think we felt a lot more comfortable with buying water that was already south of the Delta, and we knew what we were getting, into versus not sure how or if the water would make it through the Delta.
Other questions? I appreciate this, and I'm coming up for my renewal for this commission, so I've been looking back a little bit, and we did quite a few years of the supplemental water purchases specifically so that we could stave off building the desal plant as long as possible, and it was very successful, and I really want to compliment staff on all of that work because it wasn't. We weren't worried. You guys might have been. But there always seemed to be a plan with a backup plan to a backup plan. And it always, we had about a year ahead time. We'd know what was coming. We'd know, okay, here's what we're going to do if there's no rain. And then we'd make a decision. So regarding the supplemental water purchases, I feel pretty confident that we'll be able to explore that in the future. And then we did also, again, have backup plans. And that did save us quite a bit of money as a community, so appreciate that as well. And I think anything else? No? Anybody want to put forward a recommendation?
I'll make a motion that we recommend to council that the city not participate in the reacquisition of suspended Table A water, and 2, not support participation in the Delta Conveyance Project at this time.
Got a second? Oh, wait, you know what? I don't think I asked for, is there any comments from the public? No?
Could I make a comment to the motion?
Yes?
So I'll support both those, but I'm really, I don't know, I'm concerned on the second one on the conveyance thing where one moment away from having no conveyance up in Northern California. And I realize we still control a lot of our destiny with our own desal, but I just hope that if we said there was a big earthquake up there tomorrow and we lost, that we are able to replace that water the day after or make a plan on the day after. That worries me. And just philosophically, I get what you're saying about not knowing much about this, but this kind of goes back to fair participation in an early stage from all the players. And I would assume that if we came in later, that the players would go backwards and say, we're going to get back some of our costs that we spent and put those to you. And as long as we're going into that with an open mind, that will happen, just like we treat Montecito or just like however we treat anybody else. I think I'm okay with that. But it's just all so fragile that I'm a big believer in a tunnel or two tunnels happening for a bunch of reasons. And it just seems like we should move in that direction anyhow.
I think that's a great point, several great points to bring up, because I don't think we're opposed to the tunnel being built. I think it does make sense from a reliability. I think from our water supply perspective, we're all about diversifying and having a bunch of putting all of our water in a bunch of different baskets. And this doesn't get us a lot. It's a lot of costs, but it doesn't get us more and significant reliability. We'll at some point have this conversation of what are the costs of expansion, what are the costs of potable reuse. We're going to be embarking on a long-term water supply plan, and in theory, you could be thinking about taking that investment in the pipeline that could get us a little more annual reliability, and putting that to something that we feel like year after year we're actually going to get water from. So I think that's kind of some of the challenges we're going. I'm not opposed to the pipeline. I think it's a good idea. There's a lot of, for a community, especially that's 80% reliant on the Save Water project, this project makes a lot of sense. I just think we have gone down a different route given where we are in California, and so removed from it that we really couldn't put our eggs in that basket, and I'm glad we didn't, and we continue to diversify, and it comes with its own share of costs. But I think as a whole, you're right. I think it's a good idea for California to help stabilize our water supply, but I think we have other options that we're going to continue to talk about. Yeah.
Madam Chair. Just comment. I agree with Commissioner Jordan's comments in terms of the question. That's why I put in at this time, which it kind of reflected staff's position. Mm-hmm. But I did have a question. This is a CCWA decision, correct? And so, correct me, we can't individually opt out. If CCWA votes to basically participate, we're in.
No. So what'll happen is the current way that it would be structured is those who
would be proportional.
Right. You would be shielded from the costs of participating in this, depending on, say, for example, Santa Maria decides to participate. Great. They can participate. They will participate because what we're right now talking about is participating in the CEQA process. Right. And then there will be another decision point whether you want to get in. If you get in at that point, you're going to have to reimburse the other members for the CEQA cost. So this is an iterative process, but
that helps. That helps.
Right.
Thank you for the clarification. But again, I put in that's why at this time, because I think there will be an evolving process here.
Right.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much. We are going to move on to the water and wastewater legislative review. Mr. Hagmark, back to you.
All right. This was an item we had on in the spring, and due to a busy agenda, we were unable to get to it. I have several speakers on this issue, but wanted to set the platform that the state has been rather busy following the drought, cranking out legislation. We've seen a lot of different stuff out there. Some of you may be familiar with the Hertzberg bill that was put out there, which was to end all discharges to the ocean. So a lot of different stuff going in there, and what we're here to report on is some of the significant items that actually did pass and are moving forward, and will be driving will be driving a lot of staff workload. So what we're going to be talking about, water loss management. This is a big topic. And I say it now, we'd be happy to come back and have a whole item by itself about the water loss and what we're doing on that. Today we're just kind of updating you on what the state requirements are and what we've been doing to address that. Also, water shutoffs. There's been a lot of changes in how and when the city can turn off water to a property. And then, of course, the Americans Water Infrastructure Act, which is going to be driving a lot of work, and it's kind of more of a homeland security, water security bill, and then water use efficiency and conservation changes. So before we jump in here, I do want to say that, the city has some partners in this. As members of the Association of California Water Agencies, as members of the California Association of Sanitary Agencies, we are a member of Water Reuse, and of course we're also a CalDESAL member. And each one of these organizations is very active in policies, and in particular getting its members, making its members aware, and then also trying to help influence some of this legislation so that it is productive and helpful in our pursuit. So, and many of these organizations, as we just went to, typically have annual conferences that we go to and also get updates. So with that, I'm going to turn this over. Let's start off with water loss.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Dana Hoffenberg. I'm a water resources specialist, and I'm going to be talking to you about the first two items in the presentation today, which is water loss management and then also the shutoffs bill. So first, to get into SB 555, water loss management. So just to clarify, water loss in this context refers to system losses on the utility side. So we're not talking about leaks or anything on the customer side in this context. So there's two main parts to this bill. First off, it tasked the Department of Water Resources with coming up with rules and regulations regarding water loss auditing and validation. That rulemaking process has completed, and basically water suppliers are required to submit an annual water loss audit that has been validated by a third party annually by October 1st. So the second part of the legislation is the part that is still ongoing. So this part has been assigned to the State Water Resources Control Board, also just known as the board, and they are tasked with adopting volumetric water loss performance standards for real losses by this coming July 1st in 2020. So when I say real losses, they're referring to water physically leaking from the system, leaks, main breaks, things like that. This portion of the regulation also ties into the water use efficiency legislation we'll be talking about at the very end. So essentially the board has to come up with a target water loss that is individualized for each agency, and they are required to look at the full life cycle cost versus benefits and do an economic analysis on different water loss intervention tools. So the board has yet to enter the official rulemaking process, although they have had a lot of stakeholder engagement workshops. They've already had 5 workshops. One is upcoming on Monday. They have provided a draft framework, but nothing is finalized at this point. What seems to be the direction they're going in is they will give us a volumetric standard that we have to reach over a period of time, and there will be milestones that we have to achieve along the way. How much time we will have, what the milestones will be, and when we will have to achieve those milestones, unclear. Again, we have a draft framework, but nothing is finalized yet. It's also become fairly clear that we will be measuring water loss in gallons per connection per day. So that's something important to start framing how we look at measuring water loss. It is something that needs to be looked at volumetrically, so it's not something that is going to be looked at from a percentage point of view. So we'll start to be hearing the metric of gallons per connection per day more and more. So in order to come up with what the actual volumetric standard will be for each utility, the board contracted with the research team at UC Davis, and that team has been tasked with developing an economic model that each agency will be able to put in their own system inputs, and it will provide a volumetric performance standard for us. They did create a pilot program to help develop the model and gather actual data from agencies, and the city was able to participate in that pilot program. So some next steps, we just received the first draft of the model from the board earlier this week. The board is holding a public stakeholder meeting, presenting the draft model, explaining the draft model, and receiving feedback on it this Monday. And then they are asking for written comments to be due to them by October 14th. Some point soon after this, they will be entering the rulemaking process, and then we should legislatively have our performance standard by July 1st. So that's that for the
One moment.
water loss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I ask, is there any discussion at this point about what repercussions will be for exceeding a certain amount of water loss, or once we come up with this volumetric amount, what is the sense for then what?
Yeah, Chair, Councilor Sneddon, we don't know, honestly. It's pretty unclear what we're going to be asked to do and what will happen if we don't do it yet. So we can come back and tell you once we know more, but they haven't proposed anything officially yet, so we're not quite sure.
So this phase is just determining the model amounts. Okay.
Hi, Councilmember Sneddon. So SB 555 correlates with the Assembly Bill and State Bill I'll be presenting later. It's one of the 4 targets, so it falls under that enforcement, which is progressive notices by the state, and then fines do become part of it after several years of noncompliance.
Thank you.
Could you give me an example of a not real loss?
An example of a not real loss. Oh, so there's real losses, and then there's apparent losses. So that's the terminology they use. So an apparent loss is water that we produce and then don't end up selling, but that also wasn't leaked out. So it's something, if a customer meter is inaccurate and it's under registering, so we don't collect revenue from that water that was delivered, we don't register the water that was delivered, it looks like we lost it, but it wasn't actually leaked out of the system. Yeah, and then accounting errors, things like that.
So I just wanted to add to that over the last few years, we have really been investing in this. So we have replaced all of our 24,000 residential meters, and we're currently working on our larger meters, which we have a total of 27,000 meters in the system. So we've made a big headway in replacing all those meters. And also, as you may recall, we've been replacing a lot of our production meters as well, so that we feel like we're going into this. When I talk to staff, I think we're leaps and bounds ahead of most agencies when it comes to being able to track and identify these issues. Certainly, there's areas we can still improve on. AMI will help us eventually drill down to knowing where maybe in certain neighborhoods we have more water loss than in others. Maybe have to do with aging infrastructure and so on. But we will be getting more and more granular with our understanding of water loss and where it is occurring.
Is there a risk is it measured on progress? Like, will it be the amount that we're modeling now as a baseline, and then we've made progress in the interim time and we're actually leaking less, and then we're penalized for having made progress because we have to meet a certain...
So the basis that they're going after is gallons lost per service connection. Okay. So that'll be kind of I think you can add on to this, that'll kind of be the platform of performance will be if you have 27,000 connections and you've lost this amount of water, this is how much you're losing on average on a daily basis. And that will be, initially they were talking about miles of pipe, but the problem is when you have 27,000 holes in your water system, it's much more complicated than if you had, 500 holes in the same 300 miles of pipe. So I think they're trying to standardize on that, but that's kind of what this rulemaking process is going to kind of vet.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then something else to consider is the legislation requires that the board consider the economic side of things. So they shouldn't be asking us to do something that isn't economically viable. So the water that we are saving through our water loss control measures should be theoretically more valuable than the cost to implement the measures. So, if we're already at a technical minimum, and it would be an astronomical cost to get any more drops of water saved, theoretically, we shouldn't be asked to go beyond that. But again, we don't have the final model yet or the final rules and milestones, so we're not entirely sure what it will look like.
How does this compare to like the AWWA like water loss calculator? Is it like similar, or is it just like way more detailed, or?
Sure. So the first part of the legislation that I talked about in the very beginning that DWR had to deal with, so we have to produce an annual water loss audit, and that is exactly what you're talking about. It is the AWWA. It's basically just a fancy Excel spreadsheet that we put a bunch of inputs into, and it calculates our water loss for us. So we do have to go through that process every year. I expect there to be more higher levels that are more intense staff time and data collection wise that will be different milestones along the path. Okay. Again, I'm not totally sure, but there will probably be more intensive things that we will have to do.
Commissioner Kilbourne, I appreciate it. I mean, from an engineering standpoint, when we put in a new, say we replace and put in a new main, AWWA has there is acceptable losses. So what we do is we typically chlorinate and pressurize that line. And we can actually tell how much water was lost as we let it sit for 8 hours or whatever. And there are acceptable losses in which the contractor has to abide by, and it's considered, because we're talking about gasketed pipe, that is considered acceptable. And if it doesn't meet that criteria, then the contractor is responsible for tracking down wherever it's leaking and make that repair. And so to that extent, I'm kind of curious how that feeds into this. When you have 300 miles of pipe and a joint every 20 feet, you do have a lot of joints and potential opportunities for some reasonable leakage.
So, of course, I've been just on a rant about public imaging lately. And to me, this, while some might look at this as more government intrusion and bureaucracy and going all the way down to a threat to you and me using water at home and what the penalties are, it's really indicative of the false impression we have of water, have had for 100 years. And that's that it just falls from the sky and I can use it, or it's just flowing in a creek and I can use it. And it's just not the case anymore. And it's really, this type of stuff should be education talking points on the role of water in modern times and how it is just not there to be taken and comes for free, and the valuable asset and resource there is. There should be a way to take this kind of perceived government bureaucracy intruding into my life and massage that into, this is kind of how we have to transition to making sure that we really use the resource efficiently. So I would encourage you to start looking at ways to do that already.
Yeah, it's a good messaging point with the advanced metering infrastructure, because as much as it will hopefully empower our customers and give them that information, it also empowers us as to where that water is being used and how it's being used and whether it got from our production facilities to their home. So I think we're going to get a significant benefit from it as well, to understand these system losses.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to move on to the next piece of legislation, which is SB 998, and that deals with water shutoffs, or also known as disconnections. So the requirements under this statute come into effect on February 1st of this coming year. It essentially restricts the utility's ability to disconnect residential water service due to non-payment. And so it requires that water suppliers have a detailed written disconnect policy. And it also prohibits the disconnection of residential accounts that have been delinquent for less than 60 days. So this is a change from our current policy. It also basically prohibits disconnection when a customer proves that they are not able to pay and they have shown that shutoff would be a health and safety threat, and they are willing to enter into an alternative payment arrangement. It also limits reconnection fees. So those are fees customers pay after they have been disconnected in order to get their water turned back on. It limits those reconnection fees for those customers who are below 200% of the federal poverty line. The city must also report its number of residential disconnections due to non-payment to the state board, as well as on the city's website annually. So it requires that the written policy and notices be provided in English and any other language spoken by a certain percentage of customers. If we're found to be out of compliance, it's potentially a $1,000 a day fine, and we could have our policies stopped basically by the Attorney General if we're found to be outside of compliance. So our next steps, it does require a lot of reworking of our policies and day-to-day operations. So we have a working group with our water supply, meter services, and utility billing team because it does affect a bunch of different groups, including water and finance. And the new policy and procedures will come back to the Water Commission. And that's all I have for disconnects, unless there are some questions on that one. Okay.
Good morning again, Chair Burney and Commissioners. I'm Kathy Taylor, the Acting Water Supply Manager for the city, and I'm here to speak about America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. The President signed this into law on October 23rd, 2018. It applies to drinking water agencies serving more than 3,300 customers. And under this act, we're supposed to required to perform a risk and resilience assessment and create an emergency response plan for the water system. And the risk and resilience assessment is due December 2020, and the emergency response plan is due 6 months after that. And both documents must be updated every 5 years. And the primary work in this under this act is to create the risk and resiliency assessment, to perform it, and with consideration for the risk to the system from malevolent acts and natural hazards, to consider resiliency of the water system assets, to look at the monitoring practices and financial infrastructure, and investigate the use and storage of chemicals, and also look at the operations and maintenance of the system. And the emergency response plan piece is we are to come up with strategies and resources to improve system resiliency, to make plans and procedures that can be implemented, and to look for actions and procedures and equipment which can significantly lessen the impact of malevolent acts or natural hazards, and to come up with strategies that can be used to aid in the detection of a threat to the security or resiliency of the system. So our next steps on this are to seek out more training. They started coming out with a lot of good webinars and seminars, and to then create and distribute an RFP to consulting firms. This is a significant workload piece, and I think it's more than any 1 or 3 or 5 people can do and meet the deadline. So it will take a lot of staff effort, but I think a consulting firm guiding us through this process is needed in this case. And our goal is to have a firm under contract by January. So with that, I'll take any questions on the AWIA.
Yeah, it's one of those two pills that's going to be probably pretty significant effort, and then hopefully once we get it established, it'll be something that staff can just maintain as we have to renew it every 5 years.
Does there appear to be any grant funding available for this, or?
We haven't seen anything. It's kind of a directive to every water agency to develop. So, yeah.
It's even though it was signed into law in 2018, they're just now rolling out the regulations. The training started this late summer. I attended a seminar just last week on this. The EPA is putting these seminars on, and I know there's a conference down in San Diego in a couple months that should be very informative.
And that in the trainings they give an idea of what that means, the
Yeah.
resiliency, because it's a good idea to plan for resiliency. I'm wondering if there are directions on.
Yes, they're actually really clear with it. They have a toolkit, and it's a lot of data gathering. We're fortunate we've done a lot of good work in preparation. Right now, you're aware that we're doing a system-wide water infrastructure plan right now, and information that's being gathered in that effort will be used. And a few years ago, we created a computer maintenance management system for the distribution system, and under that effort, the consultant looked at did a risk assessment of all of our primary facilities in water distribution. I'm sure that document will be very useful. We have lots of endless data in our geographical information system. I'm sure we'll be drawing from that. So we do have a lot of the information in various areas. This will be putting it all together and then creating the plans for the emergency response. So essentially, it's as I read it, it's as much or as little work as you want to put into it. You can look at it like every individual pump station, every individual reservoir, or you could just say this is what we do for reservoirs. Okay. That's that type of level. But I think it should be a substantial document that we can have, and if we do it right the first time, I think in the next 5 years it'll be easy to update, rather than starting off with something that's shoddy and does not serve us well, and then we're having to do it later in 5 years. So
Excellent.
I think it's reasonable to put some effort into this.
And then one more question: does it make public what our vulnerabilities are?
That's a very good question. That is one of the questions that's been coming up in the training, and I'm not.
Yes, we've had that question of, well, this should be the document to go to, right? This is going to say all your problems. So yeah, hopefully we can put that information in there in such a way that it isn't a roadmap for someone. We did not budget for this effort, and so we're kind of digging in and trying to figure out what we would be spending on something like this, but likely something that we'll be pulling from reserves at this time. We're still working on that aspect of it.
Thank you.
Is there any reason we wouldn't ask it to be put in the federal government wants this, and it's in their interest, because if there is a problem, then FEMA's going to have to come in and spend some money. So wouldn't this be something we could go to Congressmember Carbajal and ask him to put it in the federal budget? I mean, we could ask. It might not happen, but
I'm happy to have that conversation. Yeah, I can reach out to their assistant, Wendy Mata, and see what can be done. Because, yeah, as you can see, you easily can spend a lot of money really digging into this if you wanted to have a fully developed document.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Just a quick question on earthquake preparedness and even evaluation of risks from earthquake. Have we done something in the past?
Well, yeah. Again, with the risk assessment that we did for our CMMS, the asset management program, we have looked at that, and exactly, some of our reservoirs there's redundancy, we can put them out, and some of them are very vital. The same thing with our pump stations, and especially recently with the Edison's PSPS, the public safety shutdown that they are rolling out. We're looking at where are our weaknesses with our electrical supplies, and so we're looking at putting backup generators and how robust is our system. So we've done a lot of the work, and I think a lot of it will just be gathering this information and organizing it and putting it in this document. Thank you.
Is it something in the text in the memo? Is it 3,300 customers or people?
Customers.
Okay.
And the other cutoff is
update that in here. So.
Oh, thank you very much. And then those who have over 100,000 customers. No, I take that back. I'm sorry. It's people. It is people, because yes, I misspoke. Because over 100,000 people, that determines the deadline. And since we have a population that we serve as 92,000, so that's what established the deadline that we have to have this completed by December 2020. For those who serve over 100,000 people, there's deadline, I believe, is March of 2020. So I'm very happy that we're under that limit there.
Chair Barney, members of the Commission, my name is Madeline Wood, and I will be going over Assembly Bill 1668 and Senate Bill 606. These two laws were signed in May 2018 and are based on Governor Brown's Executive Order B 3716 to make water conservation a California way of life. They're interrelated bills, and they amend existing water law and focus on long-term water efficiency and reporting. They set the basis for the state to create, adopt, report, and enforce a water budget-based method for quantifying urban retail water supply or water use targets. And the legislation also correlates with SB 555, the water loss management legislation that Ms. Hoffenberg spoke about. Water suppliers will need to meet a sum of 4 water use standards. These water use standards or targets will be unique to each water supplier, but they are not set for individual water customers. It'll be on a supplier level. The standard for indoor water use is 55 gallons per capita per day, which will be multiplied by the population. This standard will reduce over time to 52.5 gallons per capita per day by 2030 and 50 gallons per capita per day after 2030. The residential outdoor standard is yet to be developed. It will be based on the community's climate and total landscaped area, which will be measured via aerial imagery by the state. The water loss standard is what Ms. Hoffenberg spoke about and is yet to be finalized, but will be a volumetric water loss performance standard plus reporting. The standard for commercial, industrial, and institutional, or CII as we call it, landscape water use is also yet to be determined. It's likely to be similar to the residential outdoor standard based on climate and landscaped area. Additionally, there will be CII indoor performance standards that we will need to report on. In terms of reporting, we will be required to report to the state monthly on production, consumption, and conservation. The state did require this monthly reporting starting in 2014 when Governor Brown declared an emergency drought, and we have continued this monthly reporting voluntarily since the drought was rescinded. New reporting will include an annual report due each November to document compliance with the urban water use objectives. It'll also include changes to the urban water management plans that we develop and submit every 5 years to the state, and a new water shortage assessment that's due each June to determine if there is an anticipated shortage that coming year. In terms of compliance, there is a progressive enforcement approach that the state has laid out. This begins in 2023. If the targets are not met by the water suppliers, the state can issue a series of informational orders, written notices, etc. And then at year 2027 and thereafter, if the targets have not been met, hefty fines will be incurred. In terms of next steps, as you can see, most of the standards are still being developed. Staff is involved in many meetings hosted by state agencies, as well as meetings and resources with our membership organizations, such as the Association of California Water Agencies, the California Water Efficiency Partnership, and the Water Now Alliance. We're also currently participating in an early adopter pilot project with Eagle Aerial, which is the vendor that the state selected for all of the aerial mapping. We will have it early, and we can access the aerial mapping data and software to see how it can best fit our needs to attain to the outdoor water use standard for the city of Santa Barbara. And I'm here for any questions.
I'm just curious on this aerial survey and to get the acreage. That's on a per parcel basis?
So they will map on a per parcel basis, and that imagery will be available to us, but the standard will be based on all of our landscape area. And there's currently a debate about irrigable versus irrigated because we have sort of the transition zone as we go into the foothills where people have native plants and oak woodlands that they're not irrigating, and there's a concern about how that will show up on the aerial imagery.
That's really going to be difficult, that whole thing.
I agree.
Madeline, that circle with commercial that was on there on that chart, is that where they'll eventually pick up hotel use?
So for the CII measures, the target is specific to the outdoor use of CII. And then for indoor use, I believe since throughout the state it's so diverse, they're going to have performance measures, sort of how does the urban water supplier approach CII customers and how do we enact programs to help them reduce water use? Because throughout the state you have very different manufacturing, you have a lot of different industries, so that's been one of the hard ones is any type of sort of baseline statewide has been a struggle. So it's mostly an outdoor CII because that's more of a baseline. You can base that on climate.
And we actually come real close to the residential 50 right now, don't we?
Yes, we believe that the
the
55 should not be an issue for us. And statewide, that's sort of what people
Even
are thinking
we're
too.
less than that right now, aren't we?
Well, and I want to clarify this because I've had people panicked when they read news articles on this, that the government's getting in their business and telling them they have to use less than 55 gallons. And to be clear, this is an average for all customers, but it's also, we're talking about indoor water uses, not outdoor. And so when we're hitting 50 gallons per capita, that includes the outdoor watering that they're doing too.
Okay.
I do not see this at this time, given the past behavior of our community. I do not see this being a significant issue for us. I feel like we have a very water conscious community, and I think that the cost of water here kind of represents its value to us. And so we're going to have a lot of work in reporting this and staying pace, but I don't believe it's going to be a major challenge for our community to achieve.
And then you
this goal.
guys agree too that when they get around to recognizing that a significant amount of our exposure is hotels in the city, that water use, we do our messaging and our conservation efforts is what would back up the ability not to be able to pick a number, but it would be based on our practices, right? Is that what you just said?
For the CII target
If that's where
specifically,
hotels end up, yeah.
they would be lumped into most likely two categories. So CII outdoor, which would be aerial imagery. And one of the concerns with that is we have a lot of mixed use meters for our hotels.
Okay.
And there's one of the challenges that we as an older city and other communities like ours might experience is converting those to separate irrigation meters. There's a big push statewide to do that. So that exterior portion is sort of the aerial imagery, landscaped area equation, and then indoor would be the programs that we run and the ways that we survey and audit hotels and work
So
with
if
them
we
to
see that
reduce the
coming in the
use.
commercial area, are we doing anything from a requirement on new development to go there now? Or are we just going
It
to wait
is.
and
Yes, it definitely
exacerbate the
is.
problem eventually?
It's been a separate irrigation meters have been a requirement for many years. We're just talking about the hotels that have been
Okay.
here for much
All right.
longer. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, there's a few of those in the limit too. So, yeah, thanks.
And how does this relate to this lovely graph in our water managers about our gallons per capita per day? And I realize this is more of an overall goal, but is this going to go away? Are we going to update it to?
Chair Bernie, that's a good question. So the intent of this legislation, some people have called it, let's see, so we have 20% by 2020, and this, I think, sometimes people are calling 30% by 2030. Anecdotally, it's the intent of the legislation is because that GPCD 2020 target is about to pass, that there is more conservation legislation, especially in light of the recent drought. So the intent is that it is more stringent than 20 by 2020, but as you can see, we've surpassed that target. So it's hard to determine how stringent they're going to be, but there has been some concern that if they see that all suppliers are just aces across the board meeting the targets, that they will relook at how they've calculated things and potentially make them more stringent. So yes, I think we'll have a new chart at some point.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this? No? Thank you. Was that?
So as you can tell in your packet, there is a lot more that is the state has been kicking around. And we are happy to the best of our knowledge answer any other questions you have, but these were the ones that we felt were going to be driving a lot of work or will be driving a lot of work in the next couple years.
Questions on other legislation? I had a question for Dr. Keller on SB 1422, the California Safe Drinking Water Act with microplastics. Is that something that you're working on, or?
We have been working a bit on microplastics. Actually, Dr. Holden, Trish Holden at UCSB has been doing a little bit more work, but yeah, we have some students working on microplastics and trying to get an idea. The biggest challenge is how to detect them and measure them and be quantitative about that, but there's work on that.
You mentioned Hertzberg. Did that have any legs in the Capitol? Did that go anywhere?
It did not, but eventually I think the writing's on the wall. And I think the challenge in why it continues to not get any traction is there's no regulations to support direct potable reuse or some version thereof. I think once those regulations are developed in the next 5 to 10 years, then I think that initiative will start to take on more traction. I think the challenge that we all face is that no matter what you do, there will always be some need for discharge. Even with potable reuse, you're likely to reject about 20% of that water. And anyway, it's going to require a total recalibration of what discharge means. I think that's where they want to go. It's clear.
Okay. This is not related to us. It's really for our Turo. SB 414, the Small Systems Water Authority. Jim Salzman wrote a paper on that, and I'm curious what happened to that particular bill. And I can look it up later, but I was going to send that on to Jim to let him know that was happening.
Okay. Thanks. Yep. Thanks.
So I have one more question too. So I don't know what it was called, the drinking water tax that we saw up in Monterey, has that gone away?
It did go away.
It died.
And the state used general fund monies to establish the fund. So it did not die in that sense. They did set aside, I don't remember the amount of money, but
they use the convoluted thing of when we have a surplus, we'll put a percent of that surplus only, or
they started some seed money in there. So they took, I guess they had a surplus this last year of money, and they started a seed fund to help out disadvantaged communities deal with.
That's unfortunate. For you guys who don't know what that was, if you don't, it's so if you imagine a donut, and we're pretty blessed here. We have the ability and the economics to treat pretty much any type of water we ever get and make it clean for ourselves. But as soon as you drive north, and especially inland, that's not necessarily the case. There's historical communities there that have basically just put a pipe down into the ground and pulled the water up and drink it. So if you imagine a donut, there's a community in the middle of the donut, and the donut itself is agricultural operations. And over decades, those agricultural operations have put whatever they have down onto the land, nitrates, whatever, over fertilization, and have essentially poisoned the drinking water of these communities in the middle. And it's really difficult then when you look out in every direction pointing outside of that center of the donut, who you can blame and how you're going to blame them and what you're going to do and what my lettuce is going to cost and all those kinds of considerations. And this is why Big Ag loved me when I was on the water board. But somebody came up, I want to say somebody at the State Water Board said, well, let's just add 30 cents or 25 cents a month to every water bill in the state of California and generate tens of millions of dollars a year. And we will take that and go work with these very often disadvantaged, underrepresented communities to get their drinking water back. And it seemed like a nice way to, without litigation at particular parties, to go after that. And state industry groups saw the word tax, and so they never should have used the word tax, and just got all crazy about it. But then it mutated to, well, if we have the money, we'll put some money towards that. But it's unfortunate because it would have almost built an enterprise fund of dedicated flow to solve that in what was probably a much more elegant way than suing a particular agricultural operation for years and trying to get them to pay for the perceived damage that they did. So If you get a chance ever to talk that up again, you can chat it up.
Are you talking about attachment 3, governor and legislature leaders collaborate on safe drinking water solutions?
Might be.
In our
Is it?
packet? Where they did $130 million, $100 million from the greenhouse gas reduction fund and
Yep.
$30 million from.
Not enough.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying, it's,
So-
yeah, it's in the, yeah.
A quick additional, there's at the federal level, there's also legislation right now passing or been discussed on lead pipe replacement because of all the scares they had in New Jersey and all that. And I think it's moving quickly through the Congress. So do we have any idea what that would imply for us, or have you followed it?
Well, we've had that's already come up. A lot of it following the Flint, Michigan issues. We don't have any lead services or lead connections. However, we do have a requirement to test older homes, and so we're always looking for older homes who would be interested in being part of our pilot that we do, or sampling that we do, in which we have to gather and test these older homes utilizing our water, just to make sure that it's not somehow causing that problem. But it would be particular to a homeowner. But we are curious about all of our customers. But we do not believe we have an issue here.
To that end, did I read essentially you can put chemicals in the water that stops the leaching of the lead?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do we do that?
We do not.
Okay.
I think that would be certainly one thing that was the Flint, Michigan issue, right? If you have really soft water, there are things that you could do to harden it up and make it less aggressive, which would slow or stop the breakdown of the lead. If you were to find that problem in our community, that'd be a solution. But we don't have any lead connections.
So how do we survey now, and how do you choose the homes to survey?
If I recall, we are required by the state to do it, and we like to look for homes. There's a certain age group that you're looking where lead fittings potentially were. There we go.
Kathy?
I know a little more about this.
Okay.
I think the targeted years are like 1980, 1984, around in there is when they want to find participants. And finding participants, we're the government. We're going to come in your house and test your water. It's really hard. So we have a core group that we go to year after year after year to do it's lead and copper. In our lab, Galen Fair, the supervisor there, she heads this effort up every 2 years.
Just somebody has an older home. If you're ever looking for a test case.
We'll put you on the list.
Okay.
We do add for the desal water because the desal water has to have that. Otherwise,
Right.
that'd be terribly corrosive. no?
Exactly.
So that one is hardened because of that. no?
That's a great example. The communities that typically who have put the potential lead problem and also have soft water, that's typically where you'll get the problem. And desal is, when it comes out of the filters, it's called permeate, and it's very, very soft. And that's why we were adding lime back to that water to harden it up so that it isn't aggressive not only to our pipes, but also to people, living things. Mm-hmm.
All right. Any last questions or comments on legislation? No? Thank you very much. Commissioner Davis, I think Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan Subcommittee report.
Well, after how many months? A few months, we finally did have a meeting. And, Councilmember Sneddon can help me with this. We did meet a week ago. It was the first time when we brought up to date that we'd completed the vulnerability assessment. We're now doing the adaptation plan. There is a draft adaptation plan in production. I think it's now going to be scheduled in January. It was going to be in October, November, but I think we're not going to hit the streets until January now. The grant application requirement is to have an administrative draft by December. That's going to happen in that regard. The committee itself is going to have, if you will, 30,000-foot elevation discussions of what the major issues are going to be between now and then. And then in January, they're going to be, between now and January, there'll be two council work sessions, one on the vulnerability assessment, and then when the administrative draft is getting closer to release, on the adaptation plan draft itself. When it's released in January, then we'll go into a public participation process in the winter and spring which is then coming back through the committee, the subcommittee, with possible presentations back here to this commission in that regard, and ultimately on to council.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis.
Right.
Just to add to that, too, that this initial adaptation plan is provided to us by consultants and will have a variety of feasible, infeasible, expensive, less expensive options, and they should not be considered as already decided upon. Once those are released, those are from a consultant, and then we'll have public engagement, council engagement, water commission engagement in which of these options and how to proceed from there.
And one other addition, there will be a near-term action plan, which will be important because that plan basically will probably call for a number of technical studies, especially related to our water, wastewater system in that regard. So that's where we're at, and we're going to be meeting every 2 weeks between now and the end of the year.
Is the vulnerability report public?
Yeah, it's online.
Is it online?
Yeah, if
Okay.
you go, again, I think we sent the link around, but that was now probably 8 months ago or so. Yeah, but you go to the website, and it's linked from there.
So just as an ad, the whole sea level rise thing is showing up in absolutely everything that we're doing. You need a loan. They want to know what your status is of yours. Right now, there isn't any deliverables or deadlines in it, but it's they want a status update. They would like to put stuff in, but I think we're early on in this process and we really haven't established. Most recently, it's come up in our NPDES permit renewal. The regional board, in my mind, was getting a little bit ahead of themselves, asking, so what are you doing with L-Star when you're moving it? And I'm like, okay, hold on again, back up. We've got a lot of different issues to tackle here. We are looking at this as a community, at all city issues that go on with it. And yes, of course, wastewater is important. And what I wanted to get across is that our wastewater treatment plant and our facilities it's not something we foresee having a significant impact prior to 2030. So we have time to start to put together these planning documents. So if we're spending the next 5 to 10 years putting these together, it is in good. We want to make sure we have a cohesive message here because there are a lot of different options. Certainly we aren't the only community dealing with this issue or have dealt with it. There's lots of communities that have dealt with this issue. So anyway, so we'll see it more and more creep into everything that we do.
If I could add one more comment also, that when people go to the website and look at the vulnerability assessment, it's really important to keep in mind that if we were to do nothing, that would be what's the projected model. And they're accepted models, USGS models, very well accepted science on that, which we're looking at to consider. But it's important for the public and for everyone who reads that report to realize that that's worst case scenario if nothing were to change and we were to take no action at all.
I'll make one comment on that, and it's more editorial, which I made at the committee, and that is it's looking at doing nothing, but when it says that essentially all the beaches will be lost, that doesn't really look at what allowing retreat to happen would look like. They assumed basically that, yes, we would end up actually protecting something. Right, we weren't going to let it just manage. They call them. It was interesting. The Coastal Commission had a work session. Jason Dominguez went for us, and they had a big discussion about the concept of managed retreat. That in fact, retreat sounded like we were losing, and it was a negative term. And they're looking for a new term to what that is. But it's kind of like a natural retreat to essentially allow beaches to reform. So when you look in there, it's going to say in 2100. 80% of the beaches are all gone. There's zero. There is no sand, no dry sand again. But yes, it's not doing anything, but somehow we did assume that we weren't going to let everything go in that regard.
We do have a comment from the public. Ms. Thompson?
Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Allison Thompson, and I'm speaking on behalf of Heal the Ocean.
Ms. Thompson, hit the little green button. Push where it says push.
Okay, good. Okay. Do I need to restart? No. Okay. I just wanted to speak on behalf of Heal the Ocean and just emphasize how important sea level rise adaptation is for this community. And on September 10th, our executive director, Hillary Hauser, attended the subcommittee meeting and asked the staff and committee members for the interim report or sea level rise plan that's currently used. And so we just want to emphasize that while we are waiting for this official plan to be released and to be certified by the Coastal Commission, there is policy in place that can be used to help the city adapt in the meantime and plan. It's section 5.1 of this lovely document. And so we understand we have to wait for approval. And in the meantime, we just really encourage that we plan now for local decision making in the coastal zone, especially when the report itself claims that like coastal flooding and wave impacts will inundate a portion of that area. So development and things should be considered with sea level rise in mind. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Other questions or comments on sea level rise adaptation planning? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Councilmember Snead and Dave, for leading the charge for us. Back to Mr. Hagmark, Water Resources Manager's report.
I wanted to, as you saw Kathy Taylor here stepping in as the water supply manager, I just wanted to kind of update the commission on some of the changes. I've asked Matt Ward to be the acting water system manager. And in the meantime, I am looking to potentially make some changes to the water supply manager position, kind of elevating it somewhat, shifting some of the workload. We've needed to recognize the additional workload of DSAL. Recognizing AMI and that workload that's coming, SLIP, a lot of things that we're working on, really trying to take a concerted effort to recognize the customer service aspect of what we do. I believe building trust and high regard with our community is one of our number one priorities, and so to that, kind of assigning a manager and a group to kind of take that along with water supply. So looking at making some changes there. Likely those would be part of the budget submittal for next year. And so in the interim, trying to get a structure in place to cover all our bases. So
does that mean we're going to be without, or Kathy's going to be acting, so we're going to be without a water supply manager until next fiscal year?
Correct. That does not mean that we're not doing the long-term water supply plan. We hope to get the RFP out next month. Dakota Corey and Kathy Taylor have been working on that document and finishing it up. And so we're moving ahead full steam on that. We're not going to be waiting for the new supply manager to come on board. So with that, you also have your packet in front of you. Happy to answer any questions. I noticed what wasn't in here is our spills to date. So for this year, we've had 3 spills. So we're doing really well. Again, I'd like to think it's because of all the work we have been doing, and we're just finally seeing the fruit of that work. As far as conservation goes, we're still seeing pretty consistently 30% conservation. It's great. I'm glad to see that the community did not let up. Part of the challenge is financially, we assumed there would be some rebounding, and so we are carefully watching revenues. Last year we came in almost $2 million below projection because we did not see much of a rebound in water usage. And so we just need to calibrate, figure out what is our new normal going forward. This was a cooler than normal summer, which I think we had August, which kind of led to sorry. That kind of led to, I think, some reductions in outdoor watering usage as well. But certainly pleased. I don't want to at any point say that I don't appreciate the conservation. I think that's great. I think we just need to internally take a relook at how we're kind of structured because we did assume some reduction in conservation. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, general questions you may have as well.
I just had a question on Gibraltar. How are we managing that reservoir? We're taking water from that every month.
Yeah, so our goal with Gibraltar right now is to make space. We want to make space. It spilled, as you know, this year, and so we're wanting to free up space in that reservoir to hold more water for this coming year. So we put a priority on getting water out of there. Recently, we've actually stopped for about 3 weeks. We stopped deliveries because we're replacing the diversion meter there. So that was an upgrade we've been kind of planning for. But otherwise, we continue to divert. At the same time, we're producing enough electricity to cover our portion of costs at Cater. So producing quite a bit of electricity there, which has been fantastic. Mm-hmm.
Sure. When you look at that graph, in a regression analysis, we've already hit basically below, right? So essentially, you would say that long term, we've already passed the point of no return on Gibraltar. What's it look like in terms of time when, in fact, we would actually be fully silted in?
Well, that's a great question. I would say we're closing in on that right now because what happens is we have used radial arm gates as we did the tour up there. The radial arm gates are about 20 feet tall, and really you're going to get sediment filling up until it hits the bottom of those gates, and at that point sediment will just continue to pass the reservoir. I believe it was somewhere in the 3 to 4,000 acre foot range is kind of where we expect there to be kind of a stabilization of sorts, and then sediment will just kind of pass through the reservoir. When we're exploring other options for how we continue, as you know, we've been kind of flustered by the pass-through agreement and making progress on that. And so kind of trying to explore other options for continuing to exercise our rights to divert from Gibraltar. So we're looking at different options on that.
The only other comment on Kachuma, the State Water Board adopted the order the other day. And I was hoping the media release that the water board put out, I hope that could be sent around to the commissioners just for information.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I'm also happy to, once we've had a chance to kind of digest what the final order looks like, we can also come back and do a presentation and answer questions. The board ultimately adopted scenario 5C. Yeah. We had hoped for something better. It will have impacts to our water supply, and we have some modeling that's been done on that. So as part of that, if you would like, I can come back and talk about what some of those impacts. I think I would categorize it as it's, again, this continued diminishment. So we'll have this, then there's still the biological opinion to come. And then there's the renewal of the Kachuma contract that's coming, and then there's pressures on that to do something different. So with each one of these, they eat away at the available supplies of our surface water. So
I would appreciate that coming back for a discussion. Thank you.
Okay. I also wanted to I think I sent an email to everybody letting them know that I went to former Commissioner James Smith's funeral on Tuesday, and it was very nice, and really appreciated his 16 years of service to the Water Commission. It was really impressive, and I was happy to get up and speak to the group when the mic went around and just talk about his commitment to community service. For me, that's pretty significant, to work a full career and then dedicate your life to being invested in the community like that. And it seemed like he lived that out in many parts of his life, so that was very much appreciated.
And Madam Chair, to that degree, I would hope that we could adjourn this meeting in honor of Jim in that regard.
We can, just one more question, unless anybody else has a question. For the recycled water, looks like our blend is up for July and August. Why are we seeing such an increase in blend water?
Thank you for asking. So we did have a failure of the piping again. We fortunately now have it wrapped with a plastic netting, so when it breaks, we can be assured that our employees will not be hurt, but it did shatter again. And staff, unfortunately or fortunately, have all the parts, and we're able to get it somewhat put back together again. We have hired a consultant who is working on both a short-term and long-term solution to that. Furthermore, and I don't know, Mr. Henschke wants to come up and talk an update on the case with CDM. Do we have any information that we can share with the commission on that?
While he's coming up, I know we've talked about this in the past. I don't know if there was any effort to reach out to those the recycled customers and let them know that we had a failure and ask them to reduce for a period of time while we're getting the pipe back together. Is that something we can do?
We saw it as a short-term basis and kind of the back and forth. If we had more of a long-term outage, then I think we would have reached out to them in that case, but we did not in this particular situation. I should add that right now the facility seems to be operating, outside of the piping, operating well. Once we get a handle on the piping, we should have less of an issue.
Honorable Chair, members of the Commission, Dan Hinchke, Assistant City Attorney. Regarding the lawsuit against CDM, we do have a judgment in the case. The judgment was in favor of the city for a little over $2 million. We have our attorney's fee and cost motions are pending, and those will be heard, if I recall, about the second week of October. Other than that, I don't have anything else to report. I can't give you the exact number because I don't remember it, but I know that the judgment was more than $2 million, and the jury did find that CDM Smith was negligent in the work that it performed for the city. Any questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. That's been a long time coming. So also thanks to the judge and jury on that one. Okay, any final questions, comments before we adjourn? No? Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Hagmark and city staff.
Adjourning in...
Oh, in honor of James Smith. Sorry.
Yeah.
You got it.
Thank you.